welcome to Diplomatic Channel. I am Amarachi Ubani. This week we're reviewing the inaugural UK-Africa Summit they held in London last Monday. The gains on both sides. Our guest is a Nigerian-Belgian politician who, despite being thousands of miles away, is still very concerned about Nigeria's performance on the world stage. Plus, when you mention the UAE, you think Dubai, right? Which has become the international hub for tourism, business and entertainment. But there's more to Nigeria-UAE relations. That's Diplomatic Channel in a wrap. Let's check in on those headlines and we'll be right back.
A group of survivors of the Holocaust and some of their family members have made a visit to the Auschwitz camp 75 years since they were prisoners there. They were welcomed at the gate by President of World Jewish Congress, Ronald Lauder, before walking slowly into the camp as they reminisced on the awful event. The camp was liberated on January 27, 1945, by the Soviet Red Army, and more than 1 million people, nearly all of them Jews, died at Auschwitz. The World Health Organization has warned that cases of the new coronavirus are likely to continue to rise in China, though it is too soon to evaluate. WHO spokesperson Tariq Jasarevich said the WHO and its network of experts may look at treatments and vaccines against MERS for possible use against coronavirus.
We may see more mild cases as surveillance intensifies. So the issue is not so much really on numbers that we know that will go up.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says he and the US President Donald Trump will make history in their meeting in Washington on Tuesday. Mr. Netanyahu and political rival Benny Gantz accepted an invitation to meet the US President in Washington to discuss the US administration's peace plan for the Middle East. He is scheduled to hold 2 meetings with President Trump on Monday and on Tuesday, while Mr. Gantz will meet him on Monday. The launch of President Trump's plan to end the decade-long conflict between Israel and the Palestinians has been delayed numerous times over the past 2 years. The Indian community in Abuja, Nigeria on Friday celebrated the 71st Republic Day of India and the 60th anniversary of India-Nigeria diplomatic relations. Present at the celebration was the Indian High Commissioner to Nigeria, Ambassador Abe Thakur, Nigeria's Minister of State for Foreign Affairs, Mr. Zubairu Dada, other senior Nigerian officials, and members of the diplomatic corps. The High Commissioner says trade volume between Nigeria and India increased to $13.9 billion between 2018 and 2019, and that both countries have long-standing relations based on mutual respect that predates independence of the two countries. He highlighted the first ever bilateral consular dialogue and first ever joint trade committee, both co-chaired at the level of the permanent secretaries and India's own visa norms for Nigeria being liberalized as milestones for the year 2019.
Welcome back. The much-anticipated UK-Africa Investment Summit has finally held in the UK, with Nigeria's President Muhammadu Buhari leading the Nigerian delegation. He held private meetings with the UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson and the Prince of Wales, Prince Charles. Mr. Johnson said at the summit that Britain wants to be Africa's partner of choice.
Africa is the future, and the UK has a huge and active role to play in that future.
At the summit, UK companies launched new partnerships for growth in Nigeria, with commercial deals worth over 153.4 billion naira between Nigeria and UK investors. There were also significant UK commitments to support Nigeria in developing an enabling environment to turbocharge economic growth, including helping to address land issues for investment, strengthening and improving the finance sector, helping entrepreneurs to secure access to finance, substantial initiatives to accelerate the clean energy transformation in Nigeria through enhanced technical and financial support. And of course, strong commitments to harnessing Nigeria's private sector for social development, particularly supporting women and young people in business. So back to the deals now. Deals worth over 153.4 billion naira were announced by 3 UK energy companies. The UK Department for International Trade launched 3 major programs. A 13.1 billion naira investment promotion program for Nigeria and South Africa to stimulate foreign direct investment, and facilitate technology and knowledge transfer. 17.5 billion naira growth gateway program offering trade and investment business support services across Africa, which is a joint program with the DFID, and 9.5 billion naira Trade Connects program to increase exports from Africa to the rest of the world through the provision of direct support and advice. The UK government also announced a digital access program investing up to £45 million in Nigeria, in Kenya and in South Africa, among other tech deals, while also announcing £37.4 billion naira package of support designed to help African governments create development impact bonds to channel private investment towards developmental projects. 1.7 billion naira for the She Trades program that supports women-owned businesses in Ghana, Kenya and Nigeria, and $4.3 billion in support for the African Development Bank Center for Youth Employment. Such huge investments for Africa, among other things, and Nigeria especially, and all of these happening just a couple of weeks before Britain is expected to leave the European Union. I'd like to bring in Belgian politician and Councillor for Social Affairs in the government of Mayor Bart Tomlane at the Austin City Council in West Flanders Province, Mr. Colin Sweke. Thank you, Mr. Weke, for joining us on Diplomatic Channel.
Thank you for having me.
Do you think that the UK-Africa summit has been a win-win for the UK and for Africa?
I believe that it's too early to begin to talk of win-win. This is happening for the first time. It's an inaugural session in my books, and so what that means is that it's an opportunity to assess the intentions and then look at the preparations on the ground on both sides, and then make a determination as to whether both parties in this relationship, UK on the one hand and Africa on the other hand, have had enough preparations to then build on and make this relationship a win-win. Now, listening to the British Prime Minister, I was left with no doubt that Britain knows exactly what it wants to take out of this relationship. Post-Brexit, they are looking for new partners, because don't forget that the EU was their main trading partner. And he's made no secret of the fact that Africa is the continent of the future, and I'm actually using his own words. So let us know that there are huge opportunities in Africa for Britain to take advantage of. And make no mistake about this, Britain is not looking at this as a philanthropy. I mean, in terms of helping Africa to survive. They are looking at business relationships. So Britain is ready. The question now is Africa ready as well? They determine what is in this relationship for them, and how are they going to arrange their own negotiations such that the things that are important to them, the things that are germane to their developmental aspirations, are put in the forefront, and then the strategy devised to make Britain to actually accede to their request. So we can see perhaps a situation where Britain wants Africa to survive, but whether we want Africa to thrive will now depend on how Africa positions itself.
All eyes are set on Britain this week, because this is when the announcement is supposed to be made that Britain is finally leaving the European Union. And of course, as you rightly mentioned, Britain does seem to be looking for partners outside of the European Union. Do you think that Africa can provide that support, that economic and the economic sphere that Britain needs, continue to be, the leading trading partner of the world, one of the leading trading partners of the world as it leaves the European Union?
The straightforward answer to that question is yes. And let us look at some basic statistics. It is projected that by the year 2050, 1 in 5 global consumers will be living and working in Africa. So that is 20% of the global market share. So what that means is that the potentials for businesses targeting Africa and indeed doing business with Africa to thrive is very, very huge. At this moment, Britain-Africa trade relations is basically at 2%. Now, let me single out, sorry for me to be a bit selfish this time around. I want to concentrate a bit on Nigeria. Lagos is known to be the fifth or the sixth, largest economy in Africa. So that's something very, very huge. The infrastructural deficit in Africa is also huge. So I can go on and on and on to justify the reason why Africa is a juicy investment destination for the global economy.
Is this an opportunity that Africa can leverage on? Because the focus here is to develop infrastructure so that investments can stay here and be safe. You think this is an opportunity that Africa can fully, especially Nigeria, that we can fully make use of, filling the void that will be created after Brexit and taking advantage of this here and now?
Yeah, well, you see, you will allow me to, express some dreams here. I mean, if I were on the driving seat in terms of, positioning or repositioning these negotiations, there are three main areas that I will, basically look at. I will start with the aviation industry, for example. I mean, Britain and Nigeria goes back, a long time, and even up to, recent overtures and recent relationship with Virgin, Virgin Nigeria, that was Nigeria's, national carrier. That relationship didn't work out, and so it broke out. Nothing says that Nigeria, British Airways, and Virgin cannot come together and fashion out a way where Britain can take up, say, 20% stake in the, projected Nigerian, national carrier. That would be good for Britain. That would be good for Nigeria. Now, take the automobile industry as another example. There are huge opportunities there. The last area that I look at as indeed a low-hanging fruit is, the agricultural sector, and I will be specific about the cocoa industry. Now, we know that manufacturing, processing of our cocoa is something that huge revenue can, emanate from, just like it used to be some 40, 50 years ago. Now, Cadbury's has closed shops, and they can reopen them, a manufacturing outfit in Nigeria, where in the southwest, cocoa is in abundance, and Nigeria has the potential to become the largest cocoa manufacturing, chocolate manufacturing capital of the world. And there is a huge opportunity for Britain and Nigeria to do some business.
Britain leaving the EU would definitely affect trade relations and economic growth between European Union and the rest of the world. How will that reflect on Africa?
In my opinion, I believe that Britain is not going to be the number one priority of the Africa Free Trade Agreement. Rather, it is going to be the European Union. When Britain leaves the EU at the end of this month, at the end of January, they would have an 11-month transition period to begin to negotiate the sort of relationship that they want to build with the European Union vis-a-vis other countries of the world. But in the meantime, everything stays as it is when they were in the European Union. Now, the timing of this Africa-UK Trade and Investment Summit was not a coincidence. These were all fashioned as part of preparing the ground for finally negotiating their own trade and investment arrangement. So they are sitting in very tight corner. And if Africa wants to be the killer, this is the time for them to hold Britain in areas that are not quite comfortable in terms of negotiating the best deals for Africa and the people of Africa.
Mr. Collins Wike, it's such a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you again for joining us on Diplomatic Channel.
My pleasure to be with you. Thank you so much.